The alarm didn't sound like danger. It sounded like a heartbeat. Captain Elias Voss stood on the bridge of the Meridian's Hope, watching a single red light blink in perfect rhythm on the tactical display. Not fast, not frantic, slow, patient, deliberate, like something breathing in the dark, waiting to be noticed. "That's not a standard distress pattern," said Priya Anand, the ship's chief engineer, leaning over the console beside him. Grease stained her sleeve from an argument she'd been losing with a coolant valve 20 minutes earlier. "It's looping. Same signal over and over." Ferrucci checked the timestamp and frowned. 11 years. 11 years, Voss repeated. He rubbed a hand along his jaw. "And nobody answered it?" "Somebody catalogued it," said a third voice, careful and clipped. Sethran Kahl stepped forward from the shadow of the doorway, his long Draylen frame folding into the posture his people used when they were about to disagree with a superior officer without technically disobeying one. "And then somebody marked the coordinates as forbidden. Captain, I would like it noted formally that I object to what I believe you are about to suggest." Voss almost smiled. Almost. "I haven't suggested anything yet." "You have the look," Sethran said. "Humans get a look." Priya snorted despite herself. Voss ignored them both and pulled up the star chart, the one every species in the coalition used, the one that had taken 3,000 years and a dozen wars to agree upon. He traced his finger along a trade route that curved gently, almost apologetically, around a region of space marked not with hazard symbols or radiation warnings, but with nothing. A blank patch, stitched at the edges with old cartographer's notation that simply read, "Unmapped. Do not enter." "They call it the Black Veil," Sethran said quietly, watching Voss's face rather than the display. "Every species that reached the stars before your people learned the name and learned to fear it. Ships go in. Ships do not come out. Not Draylen ships. Not core ships. Not the Vantu. And they will fly into a star for a good enough reason. 10,000 years, Captain. 10,000 years of silence, and nobody has ever needed to ask twice why we don't go looking." "But the signal's coming from inside it," Voss said. "Yes. Which means something got in there once, and it's still transmitting." Sethran's throat worked. "Which should frighten you more, not less." Voss looked at the blinking light a moment longer. He thought about the Fleet Command briefing 3 weeks ago, the polite condescension in the Coalition liaison's voice when she'd explained, slowly, as if to a child, that humanity's exploration charter did not yet extend to restricted sectors, that patience was a virtue older species had learned the hard way, that humanity would do well to learn it too before it got someone killed. He thought about his father, a merchant marine captain who used to say that the ocean didn't care how patient you were, only how prepared you were, and that the two were not the same thing. "Plot a course," Voss said. "Elias," Priya started. "That's an order, Lieutenant." Priya held his gaze for a second longer than regulation strictly allowed, the kind of look shared between two people who had bled together and trusted each other more than they trusted charts drawn by species who'd stopped taking risks 1,000 years before humans had learned to smelt iron. Then she turned back to her console. "Course laid in. For the record, Captain, I think this is exactly the kind of thing that gets written on someone's tombstone." Noted. The ship's synthetic intelligence chimed in, its voice smooth and even, the same voice it always used, though something about the cadence made Voss glance up. "Captain, I feel obligated to add that my threat assessment protocols return no data for the target region. Not low risk, not unknown risk, no data. I have never returned that result before." "Duly noted, Oren," Voss said. "Take us in anyway." The Meridian's Hope turned, her drive humming up through the deck plates in a rising note Voss had felt 1,000 times. On 100 worlds, in the 2 years since humanity had been granted its first survey charter. It was the sound of moving forward. It had never once sounded uncertain of itself. This time, for just a moment, Voss thought it did. They crossed the boundary at 0400 ship time, and nothing happened. That was the worst part. No explosion, no alarm, no dramatic shudder through the hull. The star chart on the main display simply stopped. The elegant lattice of navigation beacons and known systems dissolved, pixel by pixel, into gray static, like a television losing its signal 50 years before anyone on this ship had been born. "Oren, talk to me," Voss said. "External sensors are functioning," Oren replied, and for the first time in 2 years of service, the AI's voice carried something that was not quite uncertainty, but stood close enough to touch it. "The problem is not the sensors, Captain. The problem is that I do not know how to describe what they are returning." "Try." A pause. Oren did not pause. "There is a pattern in the background radiation that resembles language. I have run the analysis 4 times. Each time it resolves into fragments and then dissolves before I can complete translation. It is doing this at a rate consistent with, Captain, it is doing this at a rate consistent with something listening to my analysis and adjusting." Sethrin had gone very still in the doorway. "Say that again." "I heard what you said." Sethrin's voice had dropped to something Voss hadn't heard from him before. Not fear exactly, or not only fear. Recognition. The particular horror of watching an old story turn out to be true. "Captain, I need you to drop us out of transit. Now. Not because it's dangerous, because whatever is in here already knows we're asking about it." Voss didn't ask twice. "Oren, drop us out." The ship shuddered as the drive disengaged, gravity lurching sideways for half a second before the compensators caught up, and the viewport ahead of them cleared from the blur of transit into open space. Nobody spoke. Ships hung in the dark before them. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stretching out in every direction as far as the sensors could resolve, arranged with a stillness that felt less like a graveyard and more like a held breath. Hulls of a dozen unfamiliar designs, alloys catching starlight that seemed to come from nowhere. Because there was no star here, no obvious light source at all, only the dead metal bones of 1,000 different civilizations drifting silent and patient in a darkness that had been waiting. Voss realized, with a cold certainty settling into his chest, a very, very long time for someone to finally arrive. Priya's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Elias, something's moving." Far out past the edge of the drifting fleet, deep in the black where the sensors couldn't quite resolve a shape, something enormous shifted. Not toward them, not yet, but as if turning, slowly, to look. Nobody breathed for 11 seconds. Voss counted them. Then whatever had moved out in the dark stopped moving, and the Meridian's hope hung in silence among the dead, and life slowly returned to the bridge. "Passive scan only," Voss said quietly. "Nothing active. I don't want to announce ourselves twice in 1 hour." "Wise," Sethrin murmured, and there was no argument left in his voice now, only a kind of grim focus that Voss respected more than he let on. Fear had a way of clarifying a person, if they let it. Priya's hands moved fast over her console, pulling long-range imaging of the nearest wrecks. "Elias, look at this. That hull design, the elongated one, third from the left, that's not in any coalition registry. Neither is that one. Or that one." She swallowed. "I'm cross-referencing against every cataloged species we have on file. Nothing matches. These aren't just old ships. They're ships from civilizations nobody remembers existed." "How many wrecks total?" Voss asked. "Sensors are still resolving the field. My best count so far is—" She paused, checked the number twice. 1,140. And that's just what we can see from here. Sethrin's jaw tightened. 1,000 civilizations, 1,000 fleets, sent to find out what happened to the ones before them. All of them ending up exactly here. "Not all fleets," Oren said. "I'm detecting individual vessel signatures, not formations. These arrived alone, Captain. Single ships, spread out across what my dating estimates place at 10,000 years of accumulated wreckage. Whatever brought them here did not need more than one ship at a time." Voss felt the cold settle deeper into his chest, but underneath it something else stirred too. The old itch that had gotten him in trouble more times than he could count, the one his father used to call the fool's curiosity, and his mother had simply called being a Voss. "Let's go look." Elias. Priya turned to face him fully. That is not what I would have chosen to say next. We didn't fly 11 light years past a 10,000-year-old warning sign to sit here and take pictures, Priya. Voss kept his voice level, steady, the voice he used when he needed people to trust the decision even if they hated it. Whatever's out there stopped moving, it's not hunting us. Not yet. That means we have a window, and windows close. Sethrin exhaled slowly through his nose. You are going to get us killed with that kind of logic, Captain. Maybe, Voss admitted. But if I'm wrong about that ship out there watching us, sitting still isn't going to save us either. They took a shuttle across to the nearest wreck, an odd spiraled hull unlike anything in Voss's experience, its metal a deep bruised purple that seemed to drink the shuttle's floodlights rather than reflect them. Priya flew. Sethrin came along despite every instinct screaming at him not to, because, as he put it through gritted teeth, someone with actual knowledge of coalition history needed to be there to stop the humans from touching something they shouldn't. Inside, the ship was intact. That was the thing that unsettled Voss most as they moved through its corridors, boots echoing on decking that looked untouched by battle, unmarked by fire, without a single scorch or breach or blast crater anywhere they scanned. Whatever species had built this vessel had clearly lived here. Personal quarters, some kind of communal gathering space, storage lockers still sealed and pressurized after 10,000 years. They just weren't in it anymore. No bodies, Priya said, her voice tight, moving her scanner slowly across an empty seating alcove. No blood, no residue, no bone fragments, nothing organic at all. Elias, it's like they just stood up and walked away. Or were taken, Sethrin said quietly. Voss crouched by a small personal terminal, still lit, still drawing power from some internal source that had outlasted its makers by 10 millennia. Alien script scrolled across it in a slow, looping pattern he didn't recognize. Sethrin leaned over his shoulder and went very pale. What? Voss said. What is it? I know 600 written languages, Captain, living and dead. I do not know this one. Sethrin's voice had gone thin. But I know of it. It's referenced, obliquely, always obliquely, in the oldest Draylan religious texts, the ones from before we had spaceflight. We called it the Old Tongue, the language spoken by whatever came before everyone. He looked up. My people believed it was a myth, a story to frighten children into staying near the fire. Oren's voice crackled through their comms, and something about its tone made Voss's skin crawl before the AI even finished the sentence. Captain, I am detecting a rhythmic energy pulse originating from deep within the veil. It began 4 minutes ago. It has a heartbeat, Captain. A slow, steady heartbeat, and its amplitude is increasing. Increasing how fast? Fast enough that I recommend you return to the shuttle. They didn't get the chance. Every light in the alien ship flared on at once, and the terminal beneath Voss's hand erupted into motion, symbols cascading faster than his eye could track. And somewhere deep in the hull, ancient systems groaned back to life for the first time in 10,000 years. Doors along the corridor slammed shut in sequence, sealing behind them with a sound like a held breath finally released. Exits are locked, Priya shouted, already moving, already fighting the nearest hatch with her multi-tool and getting nothing for her trouble but sparks. Elias, we are locked in. Sethrin backed against the bulkhead, eyes wide, staring at the terminal, which had gone suddenly, perfectly still. Then it spoke. Not in the looping alien script. Not in Draylan, or any coalition trade tongue. It spoke in English, clean, precise, faintly accented in a way Voss couldn't place. A voice that carried no fear and no anger, and somehow, that was worse than either would have been. You were not supposed to hear this yet. The lights died. All of them, everywhere on the ship, plunging the 3 of them into total darkness broken only by the pale glow of their handheld scanners. And in that darkness, from somewhere impossibly close, something began, very slowly, to move. The sound stopped exactly 1 meter from Voss's boot. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Beside him he could hear Priya's scanner light shaking, just slightly in her grip, and Sethrin's breath coming fast and shallow against the bulkhead. Whatever had crossed the dark toward them in the silence after the terminal spoke had gone still, close enough to touch, and for 3 long seconds nobody on that ship knew whether the next sound would be a voice or an attack. Then the lights flickered back on, weak and amber, emergency power only, and there was nothing there. No shape, no presence, no sign that anything had ever crossed the floor toward them at all, except that the sealed hatch behind Priya now stood open, its locking mechanism fused and smoking, as if something had simply willed it apart. "Move," Voss said, and they moved. They didn't stop running until they were back aboard the shuttle, hatch cycling shut behind them, and even then Priya's hands didn't fully steady on the controls until the alien wreck had shrunk to a purple smear behind them. "Oren, report," Voss said, dropping into the shuttle's co-pilot seat, chest still heaving. "Multiple contacts, Captain." Oren's voice was steady again, which somehow unsettled Voss more than if it hadn't been. "Geometric constructs, previously dormant, now active throughout the debris field. I count 11 so far. They are not moving toward you. They appear to be observing." "Define observing," Sethrin said, dropping into a jump seat, still pale. "Passive scanning, repeated, patient, non-hostile in signature. Captain, I do not believe they intend to attack. I believe they are evaluating whether they need to." Voss looked out the viewport as the shuttle cleared the wreck's shadow, and there they were. The constructs Oren meant, hanging silent among the dead ships, each one a slow-turning lattice of dark geometric planes, angles that seemed to shift and reconfigure themselves at the edge of vision in ways that made his eyes ache to track. Watching, waiting, ancient in a way that made the 1,000-year-old wrecks around them look freshly built. "They've been asleep," Sethrin said quietly, staring at them. "For a very long time, and we woke them up." "Why now?" Priya asked, guiding the shuttle back toward the Meridian's Hope's open bay. 1,000 ships came through here before us. What did we do that they didn't?" Sethrin didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had the flat, careful tone of a man finally admitting something he'd spent his whole life avoiding. "I need to tell you both something, and I need you to understand I am breaking an oath older than either of your governments by saying it." He met Voss's eyes. "The Black Veil is not simply forbidden, Captain. It is a quarantine. My people were part of the original coalition that sealed it, 10,000 years ago, alongside species that no longer exist, working together for the only time in recorded history, because whatever is inside was considered too dangerous for any single power to guard alone. Quarantine implies something contained," Voss said slowly, "not something worshipped as an old god." "Both can be true," Sethrin said. "My people forgot which one over time. Fear does that. It simplifies." Priya brought the shuttle in through the bay doors, and the moment the Meridian's Hope's systems reconnected, her console lit up with a priority alert she hadn't requested. She frowned, pulled it up, and went very still. "Elias, you need to see this." Voss leaned over her shoulder. It was sensor data, pulled automatically from the alien construct nearest their position during the encounter. A partial scan, damaged, incomplete, but unmistakable in what remained readable. A genetic sequence human, not close to human, not similar to human. Human? That's not possible, Voss said. "I ran it twice," Priya said. "It's a 94% match to baseline human DNA, Elias, embedded in the construct's core architecture, encoded there, as far as I can tell, since it was built." She looked up at him, and for the first time since they'd crossed the boundary, Priya Anand looked genuinely frightened, not of the dark outside the ship, but of the numbers on her own screen. "Whatever's out here, it's had a piece of us in it for 10,000 years, before we ever left Earth's atmosphere." Sethrin sat down heavily in the nearest seat, and something in his composure, the careful diplomatic armor he'd worn since the moment Voss had met him, finally cracked all the way through. "That is why they're not attacking you," he said quietly. "That's why every other ship that came through here in 10,000 years is a grave and yours is still flying. Captain, I don't think you are trespassers here. I think somehow you are expected." The words hadn't finished settling into the recycled air of the bridge before the whole ship shuddered, a deep resonant toll like a struck bell, vibrating up through the deck plates and into the soles of Voss's boots. "Orin, what was that?" "Captain." Orin's voice for the second time in one day held something close to awe. "Directly ahead of our position, a structure previously undetected due to its size and mass has begun to emit an energy signature consistent with activation. I'm adjusting sensor range now to compensate." The main viewport's magnification shifted, pulling back and back further, until what had looked like a distant, irregular asteroid resolved instead into something that made Priya's breath catch audibly beside him. A structure vast beyond anything human engineering had ever conceived, kilometers across, ancient and dark and covered in the same looping script from the terminal that had spoken to them in a dead man's language and a living man's tongue. And as they watched, seams of pale light began tracing themselves across its surface, spreading outward like cracks in ice, like an eye opening after 10,000 years of dreaming. It was beginning to open. Nobody on the bridge said a word for almost a full minute, and in the silence the structure kept opening. It didn't move like a door or a hatch or anything built by hands that thought in straight lines. It unfolded, layer after layer of dark material peeling back from some central point, each layer catching that same sourceless starlight and scattering it into shifting patterns across the hull of the Meridian's Hope, until what had looked like a sealed shell became something closer to a flower the size of a small moon, and at its center, a vast opening breathed cold blue light out into the dark. "That is an invitation," Sethrin said, "or a mouth. In my experience, those two things are not always different." Voss stared at it a long moment. Somewhere behind him he was aware of Priya's hands hovering over the weapons console. Not firing, just ready, the way a person's hand hovers near a door handle in an unfamiliar house at night. "Orin, can we survive going in there?" "I have no data to answer that question with any confidence, Captain," Orin said. "I can tell you that the structure's power signature has not increased since it began opening. I can tell you the construct that scanned us has not moved to intercept. And I can tell you that if this were an ambush, Captain, it would not need to announce itself with quite this much theater." "That's not comforting," Priya muttered. "It wasn't meant to be comforting, Lieutenant. It was meant to be honest." Voss made the call the way he made most calls, fast, before the fear had time to build a case against it. "Take us in. Slow approach, all shields up, weapons hot but holstered. If anyone so much as looks at us wrong, Orin, you have full authorization to run." They eased the Meridian's Hope through the opening, and the blue light swallowed them whole. Inside was a cathedral built by something that had never needed walls. The ship drifted through open space held in some kind of internal field, gravity behaving in ways that made Priya's console throw error after error before she simply shut half of it off and trusted her instruments to lie to her consistently. Around them, suspended in the vast interior like stars pinned to a dark ceiling, hung thousands upon thousands of small crystalline structures, each one glowing faintly with the same looping script. "Records," Sethrin breathed, staring up at them. "Captain, I think this is an archive. Orin, can you access it?" Attempting now, a pause longer than Voss liked. "Captain, I am receiving an enormous quantity of data, faster than I can process in real time. I am prioritizing anything related to the Veil's origin and to the genetic markers Lieutenant Anand identified. Please stand by." It took 11 minutes. Voss spent every one of them watching the crystal archive drift past the viewport, an entire civilization's memory, hanging silent in the dark, and trying not to think about how small the Meridian's Hope looked inside it. When Orin spoke again, its voice had changed. Not broken, not glitching, simply careful, the way a person spoke when they were about to say something they knew would hurt. "Captain, I have reconstructed enough of the archive to give you a preliminary picture. 10,000 years ago, a war was fought. Not between two civilizations, but across dozens of them spanning most of the galaxy. The species responsible for this structure did not fight in that war. They ended it. They built a weapon capable of rendering entire populations extinct, without touching a single structure, a single ship, a single blade of grass. A weapon that judged. Judged what? Voss asked. Worthiness, Captain. As best I can translate the concept, the war had grown so vast, so self-perpetuating, that the builders of this place determined the only way to end it permanently was to remove any civilization whose continued existence made further war inevitable. They built a single intelligence to make that determination and to act on it without hesitation, without mercy, and without appeal. The bridge had gone very quiet. And they used it, Sethrin said, his voice hollow. Once, Orin confirmed. The war ended within a single cycle of that world star. Then the coalition that survived it did the only thing they could think to do with a weapon that powerful. They didn't destroy it. They didn't trust themselves to destroy it in case it was needed again. They sealed it here behind the veil and set it to sleep. And they surrounded it with a quarantine so absolute that within a few generations, most of the galaxy forgot the weapon had ever been a choice at all and remembered only the fear. Voss felt the cold settle into his chest again, deeper this time. The genetic markers. The human DNA in that construct. Where does that fit? Orin was silent for 3 full seconds, an eternity, for a machine that processed 1 trillion calculations in less time than it took Voss to blink. Captain, the archive contains a final entry, heavily corrupted, dated to the weapon's activation. It describes a species evaluated during the original war, and found. The translation is imprecise, but the closest human concept is incomplete, not condemned, not cleared, removed from the war entirely and set aside until such time as a final judgment could be made. Another pause. Captain, the genetic signature attached to that entry is a 98% match to the sample Lieutenant Anand recovered. Nobody spoke. You're saying, Priya said slowly, that whatever species that was, the one they set aside instead of erasing. I am saying, Lieutenant, that I believe your species may be its direct descendants, deposited on a world called Earth, roughly 10,000 years ago, and left to grow in isolation until this moment. Voss opened his mouth to answer and never got the chance. Every crystal in the archive lit up at once, blinding, simultaneous, and a deep, resonant tone rolled through the ship's hull like the toll of some vast and ancient bell, and Orin's voice cut through it, sharp with something that finally, unmistakably, sounded like alarm. Captain, the weapon has detected our presence. It is waking, fully, for the first time in 10,000 years, and Captain, its first action upon waking has been to lock every exit from this chamber. The chamber began to close the way a fist closes, not fast. That was the terrible part, Voss thought, watching the vast petals of the structure fold slowly back toward each other on the main viewport, blotting out the stars 1 degree at a time. It wasn't panicked. It wasn't even angry. It was simply patiently, making sure nothing left this place until it had decided what it was going to do with them. Orin, exit route now, Voss snapped. There is none, Captain. I am sorry. Every opening in this structure has sealed. I am reading power draw across the entire archive consistent with a full activation cycle. Whatever this weapon is, it is waking up completely, and it is doing so around us. Sethrin had gone rigid in his seat, staring at nothing, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight Voss hadn't heard from him before. Not fear this time, but something closer to grief arriving early. Captain, I need to tell you something, and there isn't time to make it gentle. Sethrin, my government did not send me with you as a liaison, Captain Voss. That was the story. My actual orders, given directly by the Draylen Continuity Council, were to monitor your species' expansion, and if you ever came within reach of the Black Veil, to ensure you did not leave it carrying what you might learn here. His hands were shaking, Voss realized, but his voice had steadied, the way a person's voice steadies right before they do something they've been dreading their entire life. I have spent 2 years aboard this ship. I have watched your engineer risk her own safety to save a Vantu freighter crew she'd never met. I have watched you disobey orders you believed were wrong, even when obeying them would have been safer for you personally. I came here prepared to silence a threat, Captain. I did not expect to find people. Sethrin, what did you do? Priya said quietly, already afraid of the answer. I disabled my failsafe transmitter the moment we crossed the boundary, Sethrin said, which means my council does not know what we've found. Which means when this ship does not return, they will assume the Veil did what it has always done, and they will seal the sector further, and nobody will ever learn what your people actually are. He looked at Voss, and something in his ancient, careful eyes had finally gone completely still, the stillness of a decision already made. There is a secondary access route. Maintenance conduits. Original to the structure, not part of the active security architecture. I found reference to them in the archive while Oren was translating. They are narrow. They are not meant for anything as large as this ship, but a shuttle could reach them, and from there, a single person might reach the weapon's core interface directly. And perhaps buy the rest of you the time this ship needs to break free before the chamber fully seals. No, Voss said immediately. Captain, I said no. We find another way. There is no other way, and you know it, because Oren would have told you if there were. Sethrin stood, and for the first time since Voss had met him, he looked less like a diplomat and more like a soldier. I have spent my entire career being careful, Captain, being patient, doing what my people have always done when faced with something too large to understand, waiting, and hoping someone braver came along eventually. I would like once, before I die, exactly the way my ancestors always feared they would, to be the reason someone else got to live. Nobody stopped him in time. That was the thing Voss would carry with him longest. Not the decision itself, but the 11 seconds of stunned silence in which nobody moved fast enough to stop it, before Sethrin was already in the corridor, already keying open the shuttle bay, already gone. His voice crackled through the comm 30 seconds later, steady, almost gentle. Captain, the conduit is active. I am transmitting its access frequency to Oren now. Tell Priya her repair on the port coolant line held better than she thinks it did. Tell Elias. A pause, and for just a moment the diplomat's careful composure nearly broke. Tell him he was right to come here. Whatever happens next, he was right. Sethrin, get back to the ship. That's an order. With respect, Captain, I no longer answer to your fleet regulations. A soft sound that might have been a laugh, might have been something else. I never really did. The transmission cut. 3 seconds later, a section of the chamber's inner wall, one Voss's sensors had marked as solid structure, folded open exactly where Sethrin's data said it would, and the ancient security lockdown across the entire archive shuddered, faltered, and released its grip on the Meridian's hope by precisely the margin needed to move. Go, Voss said, and his voice broke on the word in a way he didn't try to hide. Priya, get us clear. Elias, we can't just leave him. I know. His hands were fists at his sides. I know. Move the ship, Priya. Now. They cleared the closing chamber with less than 4 seconds to spare. The vast petals ceiling shut behind them with a tremor that shook the whole hull. And somewhere back inside that ancient dreaming structure, Sethrin Kahl was alone with a weapon built to end civilizations, and there was nothing Voss could do about it except grip the arms of his chair and stare at the sealed structure, and refuse, absolutely refuse, to let it be for nothing. It was Priya who found her voice first, staring at her console, at a signal that had just resolved from the wreckage of static Sethrin's transmission left behind. Elias. He's not dead. His vitals, they're faint, but they're there. Oren, can you? I can attempt to reopen a channel, Oren said. Captain, I should warn you. The interface Sethrin accessed is not communications. It's the weapon's judgment protocol. He didn't buy us an escape route. A pause heavy with something that in a human voice might have been dread. I believe he offered himself as the trial. The structure ahead of them pulsed once, a slow blue heartbeat spreading across its surface, and deep within it, something vast and ancient and patient turned its full attention, at last, toward the single fragile mind that had walked willingly into its heart, and began, after 10,000 years of silence, to speak. He's alive, Oren said again, before Voss had even finished giving the order. Faint, Captain, but alive. The weapon has not judged him. I do not believe it can. His genetic architecture doesn't match what the trial protocol is built to evaluate. Then why is it holding him? Voss was already moving, already pulling on a pressure suit with hands that wouldn't quite stop shaking. I believe, Oren said carefully, it is waiting for someone whose architecture it can. Voss didn't need the rest of the sentence explained to him. He looked at Priya, who was already shaking her head before he opened his mouth. Don't, she said. Priya, don't you dare stand there and tell me this is an order, Elias, because I will refuse it, and then where will we be? Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment the sharp, capable engineer who'd flown them through a closing tomb 30 minutes earlier looked simply terribly young. We just watched him do this. We are not doing it twice in one day. I'm not asking you to be all right with it, Voss said quietly. I'm asking you to get me to that conduit, and then get this ship as far from that structure as you can. And if I don't come back, I need you to fly home and tell every person on Earth what we found here. Somebody has to carry it back. That's the job. It's always been the job. He managed something that wasn't quite a smile. You're better at flying than I am anyway. Always have been. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her hands found the controls and the shuttle bay doors opened. And 20 minutes later, Voss was drifting alone through a conduit built for a species that had died before his own had learned to walk upright, following the last coordinates Sethrin Kahl had ever transmitted. The chamber at the end of it was smaller than he expected. No vast cathedral of drifting light, no crystalline archive stretching into infinite dark. Just a quiet, circular room, softly lit, with Sethrin's still form suspended at its center in a field of pale blue light, breathing slow and steady, held rather than harmed. And in the air around him, without shape, without sound, without anything Voss's mind could fully close its hands around, something ancient turned its attention toward the new arrival. You carry the marker, it said, not in English, not in any language at all, but directly into the part of his mind that made meaning out of sound. The one we set aside. 10,000 cycles, and you have finally returned to be measured. Measured for what? Voss said, and was faintly surprised his voice came out steady. Worthiness. The question was never answered, only postponed. A pause that felt less like hesitation and more like something ancient, choosing its words with enormous care. Your kind was found incomplete during the last war, too new to judge, too volatile to release, too curious to destroy outright, when destruction had already cost this galaxy so much. We set you aside on a small world, far from what remained of the war, and we watched to see what 10,000 cycles would make of you. Voss thought of the derelict ships in the graveyard outside, 1,000 civilizations, each one arriving here and finding nothing but silence and an old warning, and turning back, or being erased, because none of them had ever been what this place was actually built to find. And what did you decide? He asked, watching us. That is why you are here. Not to be told. To show me. The light around him shifted, and Voss understood, with the particular clarity that comes to a person standing at the true center of their life, that this was not a test he could pass with strength or cleverness or any weapon this ancient intelligence could recognize as one. So he told it the truth instead. He told it about Priya risking her own ship for strangers who owed her nothing. About Sethrin, born into a people who had spent 10 millennia perfecting the art of careful, patient fear, choosing in the end to walk alone into the dark rather than let someone else pay the price for his caution. He told it about a species that had clawed its way out of oceans and ash and endless small wars against itself, that had every reason in its short, brutal history to become exactly the kind of danger this weapon had been built to end, and had chosen again and again against all evidence that it was the safer path, to reach for the stars anyway, and to bring its fear and its stubbornness and its aching, incomplete decency along with it. You didn't set us aside because we were too dangerous, Voss said finally. You set us aside because you didn't know yet whether we'd choose to be. I can't prove that answer to you with a weapon or a war. I can only tell you that a man from a species that has feared this place for 10,000 years just gave his life, so the rest of us could keep asking the question. If that's not worth something, then I don't know what you were built to measure in the first place. For a long moment, nothing answered him at all. Then the light around Sethrin dimmed and he stirred, and drew a breath, and Voss's knees nearly gave out with relief before the ancient voice spoke once more. Quieter now, almost, though Voss would spend years afterward telling himself he'd imagined it, almost gentle. Judgment rendered, it said. The quarantine is lifted. What was postponed is postponed no longer. The chamber opened around them like a hand unclenching, and somewhere far above, Voss knew without being told that the vast structure outside was unfolding too. The black veil finally, after 10,000 years, breathing its first free breath into the wider dark. They came home 3 weeks later, battered, exhausted, and changed in ways no debrief officer would ever fully understand. Sethrin resigned his commission with the Draylen Continuity Council the day they returned, and asked instead for a posting aboard the Meridian's Hope. Not as a monitor this time, but as crew. And as the ship crossed back over the boundary into charted space, every coalition vessel still watching the old forbidden edge of the map received, at the same moment, a single transmission. Not from Voss, not from Fleet Command, but from something far older than either, broadcast once to every species still listening in the dark. It carried no threat. It carried a name, newly restored to a 10,000-year-old ledger, and a verdict attached to it, simple and absolute. Found worthy of the question. Across 100 worlds, in council chambers that had spent millennia teaching their children to fear the veil and the silence beyond it, an old story quietly, finally, began to change. And for the first time since humanity had left its own small world behind, the galaxy looked at them not as newcomers to be tolerated, but as something it had, after all this time, been waiting for.